So those of you that have taken the class previous with me kind of know I like to, or the studio, that I look at kind of the background of things and kind of get a fundamentals of a topic before really getting into the specifics. So we're just going to go through the background of what collage is. Collage is essentially, in the most simplest form, an assemblage of different forms that create a new whole. It's been practiced for thousands of years with the creation of paper, specifically in China and Japan, as calligraphers cut and paste texts for poems. So this was one of the remnants from some of the more original poetries on collage that was made in Japan. And so although this was started or kind of first recorded in China and Japan, collage has been like recreated several times during every time period and throughout almost every culture as a way to express certain things. And so if we zoom in or zoom up the timeline super fast, and we can kind of see some more modern versions of collage. And so there's different forms of collage. On the left, we see kind of what you would think of as your standard collage. This might be considered a photo merge or photo montage. And it was created by a feminist artist in Germany who was exploring the German society after World War I, and specifically looking at kind of the patriarchy of the society and kind of where things went wrong. And on the right, we have a collage, which is it's French, so I might mess up the word, but découpage is the style. And this collage looks a little different than collages we might be familiar with. It's actually made with tissue paper. This woman, what she did was she made several really outstanding and beautiful collages of which are really botanical illustrations of different plant samples that she found. So this style was really popular with aristocrats in France, and she was an actual aristocrat that did this. So she used tissue paper to create this real real like leafy and petal texture, and then she painted with watercolors to add more details. On the left, we have photo montage, a little bit more modern. This woman was from um, uh, Argentina, and she would worked for a woman's magazine where she would ask the readers to submit their dreams. And then she would use her photography to create these collages of the dreams as a way to try to illustrate the dream. And on the right, we have a much more modern version of collage by Martha Rosler, who's from New York. And she explores sort of the world from the woman's viewpoint. And particularly, she likes to look at war in the media in an interesting way. So something I think that is a really cool theme that pops up often in collage is this activism. And I think that has to do a lot with the accessibility of collage as an art form, and the fact that you can take things that are loaded. And then we talk a lot about this in our diagram talks, that you can take objects or prints that are loaded with cultural meaning and then kind of repurpose them so they carry that cultural weight, but also produce a new image. And I won't get too into my excitement for collage, like explaining how collage is everything, but collage can also be applied to music. The Avalanches, Since I Left You, has over 3,000 songs collaged into their album. So those come in music that come in the form of samples. And then in art, when you make a three-dimensional object with a bunch of different random pieces, that's called an assemblage. And so a collage can be from flat paper, cutout papers to music and the 3D world. So collage is a very abstract thing. But what is the point for us? I think there's a few really important points that just kind of looking at the past of collage can kind of help us as designers. And the first point, I think, is just that Photoshop is a tool for collage. A lot of the tools in Photoshop have real world parallels. They have real life existence. And so throughout this class, we'll kind of look back at like the dodge and burn tool and how it actually exists in the real world with a physical medium. And that'll help us kind of understand the how Photoshop's not this new thing. It's based off this really old form of art. And then I think something else that's really important, other than just understanding the context of the work that we make, is that when you look at a collage and then you look at landscape architecture renderings, you actually realize that landscape architecture renderings and perspectives are collage. And I think that if we start looking at our work, our perspectives and renderings as collage, instead of real life representations of things, then we can sort of disconnect our need to make things look perfect and hyper realistic, because really what we're creating is this collage, this illusion of reality, and it doesn't take a lot to create that illusion. So these are obviously cutouts, fake people. These are different cultural traditions in Nova Scotia, and they're all put in one place, like a dance hall of sorts. Even though we know all these images are copy and pasted, literally, physically into this site or this building here, there's enough of something there to trick our eyes. We can understand that they're all in the same room. And really the same goes with this landscape. I also want to point out in this rendering, this professional rendering here, that we have some of our friends from, let's see, non-Scandinavia website. So just pointing out how you see the same characters over and over again. And so when we look at these fine art collages and we sort of remove their background and their meaning, what we're left with is like a landscape rendering. And some of it is more successful than other parts of it, but nonetheless, we have objects and people placed within the landscape. And so I really think that, and we'll consistently do this throughout throughout this term. Really, we're talking about our renderings in our Photoshop work as collages, and we'll be treating them that way. We're going to be not pushing for perfection, but pushing towards that illusion of reality that we're looking for. So with that kind of background and the fine art world of collage, things can get kind of complicated feeling, but we'll bring it back to landscape architecture. And for the folks that aren't in landscape architecture, I think a lot of you are interested in making perspectives and renderings and communicating through graphic design, so I think these will be applicable to you. So yeah, we'll just kind of do a rapid fire of this so it doesn't drag on too far. But I have uploaded this to Canvas and attached, at the very least, the person who made them. So hopefully if one of these images is inspiring to you, you can go back and revisit it. But as we look at these, kind of consider how similar they are to some of that collage work that we saw prior. And so we're going to start with something, kind of going to start with what I consider like a baseline and work our way up. So we're starting with some examples from me, just because I can speak to them the best. And so if you have any questions, I can go back to these. And then we're going to go to student awards, ASLA student awards examples, and then end with professors that actually have been published using their collages. So when we talk about that diagram from mood board to collage for the use of communicating information, I used this rendering in my second studio to communicate with folks after I had gone through some of the historical analysis of a site, kind of threw all these images all in one place, just to give folks kind of an understanding that I'm talking about all these different time periods and all these different wildly different events that occurred, but they all occurred on the same site, and really highlight how complex that site is and the site history is. I also used Collage as a transect to explore a parking lot that was slowly being grown over by different invasive species. And this was part of my overlook class. So I spent a lot of time visiting this site, and one consistent element of the site was the geese. And so I had a lot of nice photos of the geese, which I thought was important for communicating kind of this, doing a little site analysis. It was a really important part to make sure was part of this collage. So this is a transect going from the water of the site to the hard surface of the parking lot. You can kind of see a gradient of vegetation. And this is from the same project. I found a piece of this newspaper cutting on the site, which I thought was really interesting because we were exploring the use of art and design to communicate scientific projects. And I kind of collaged in different Photoshop renderings into this piece. So when we look at these ASLA student awards, I think it's important to remember the definition of collage. It's many pieces that are assemblage of or create a whole. And that whole is a tool that these folks are using to communicate something. So the collage I see here is on the left, water in the Arctic. This little photo montage, I think, does a really excellent job of just giving us an understanding of what their experience was in the Arctic. Lots of blue and cold and different forms of snow. This is by the same group where they used collage in the form of a timeline to do something really similar to that, what I did for my studio, in exploring the timeline, not just with words and numbers, but through historical imagery of that site, just adding more of a humanist perspective to the site that folks that may not be reading can kind of connect to. This project, I think they had a little bit of fun with their collage. And in here, I believe they were exploring just like the process of finding fungi through the forests. And I think they did a wonderful job at just, yeah, having fun, but also when we talk about some of those principles of design that we learned, some of the they use these principles really well, I think, to create a very cohesive image that you're constantly kind of exploring with your eyes. This professional award through the ASLA was exploring a certain part of the ocean, of the coast, throughout a year, roughly a year. So we have data here, but I think that that collage in the background of the different images of the water throughout the time periods explains just as much about the conditions of that site to us as the data does. Um, we see different colors of water, which give us kind of different feelings. Like definitely September just feels so much warmer than April and May. But we can also kind of see the difference in the waves, um, which you can try. I tried to connect connections to with the data, and I don't know anything about waves, so it's possible that I can't make that connection. But the same group, I believe, um, also explored their site through transects, which they then made photo collages of to try to kind of um, glue together their. So you can see their transects up here, and they have the north and south. What they did was they kind of collaged them together. So it's more of a cohesive front and back sort of imagery, um, allowing you to just get a quick glimpse of the site. This project, I think, was really fun in that um, they had fun in making their graphics. And what's unique, I think, in this collage, compared to the other ones we've seen, is that they're kind of creating, well, they actually are creating a landscape. This is arguably like a site perspective through collage. So you can start to understand, we have our meadow, we have our fence, we have the playground, we have adult exercise, and they put the annotations there to help. But I thought this was a fantastic use of collage to actually represent a site or a site design. Let's see. Oops. And they do it again when they try to explain their site. So let's see. Down here, we can see they are talking about um, native plants, water, health of the water, um, education opportunities, and community support. And you can see all of that represented in this montage here. So this is where I think our idea of what a rendering is and collages start to be really very interesting. Um, and I would argue that this is a collage in that we have these, it's photo merged folks from different places applied into a landscape. But then we also have our path placed on this. We have supporting diagrams that are interacting with the site. And so as an overall page and overall composition, this is a wonderful collage. This same group, I thought, did an interesting collage where they collaged diagrams from different research projects onto their map. And I really appreciated the way that they did so, especially with the title on the top or on the right and the conclusion. They were very intentional in the way that they applied those two texts, because it really does give us the feeling of paper being placed on top of other paper. Gosh. So finally, one of, I think, the most inspirational projects that I was introduced to in my first year at UO was Curious Methods by Karen Lutsky and Sean Burkholder. And they wanted to, so these are the professors that have been published several times now, and I think they've won several awards for this project. They wanted to explore these mud flats in Salt Lake, or in Utah. And they noticed is that mud flats are often represented as very simple ecosystems, but they wanted to explore the complexity of those ecosystems and all different forms that the mud flats could take. So here's a collage of these mud flats, of different sections of these mud flats through time, to really help show us how diverse these mud flats really are. They also, so part of this is exploring, doing a site analysis in a non-traditional way by really experiencing the site through fun and through unique like experiences. And so they made a collage that communicated one of their processes in understanding the site and doing sort of a experience on the site. And so this is a photo merge where they had one person going in a circle over and over again to create these dark lines that you can then see in an aerial photo. And when we talk about sort of our design principles and that idea of repetition, I think especially this collage here on the left, if we're separating this whole piece, does an excellent job at really giving that feeling of rotation over and over again on that mud flat. And so here's a transect of that mud flat. And they inputted a few of their sort of process. So they would bike around to move materials, trying to keep like sort of a low impact on this kind of complex ecosystem. But I think this does another wonderful job at just communicating really the diversity that's on the site that you don't get to experience it with just one photo. Here's another process rendering. So I believe they were trying to represent what they see on site, and they found, I'm not sure what the balloons are, but the only like mammals or animals that they saw were the rabbits or the hares, and then they found a lot of bullet shells. So if you're interested in a new, unique way of analyzing a site and experiencing a site, I definitely recommend reading Curious Methods. It's a pretty short paper that's I find very inspirational. So we've kind of talked, or we've like gone over these like really, award-winning collages, and that can feel really intimidating because collages are a bunch of little parts that become a whole. And so I think a really important thing to identify is where to start when you're creating a collage. And I recommend first asking yourself what you want to communicate. And I think it's at this point that it's important to just kind of remember, or not remember, but let's see. Hopefully my computer doesn't fall apart. We look back at the mood board talk, this diagram here. Hopefully by now you can start to see a little bit why I say there's a mood board for utility and then a mood board for communication, because when we show these mood boards to people, we're actually showing a collage of materials. And that collage oftentimes, or does always, have a reason for existing. It's a communication device. And so when you're kind of stuck at like, all right, Ignacio told me to make a collage, Ian told me to make a collage, what do I do? I think one really good place to start is asking yourself, what do you want to explore? Do you want to explore time, the spatial, this space, a place, a process, a mood? And from there, you might be able to identify certain themes that you might be able to represent in your collage. But I also think it's important to remember that collage is a spectrum, and that is totally okay. You can make a collage that is a site analysis. You could make a collage that's just like the vibes that you're feeling, or you could make a collage for fine art. And there's so many places in between that you can end up to. Some of you might be way more into collage as just the vibe, very loose and abstract, than the analysis, and that's totally okay. I think to start, especially with this assignment, because I didn't ask, or we're not in a studio yet, working towards a specific message that we're trying to communicate to folks, is just, so we have all these random images that are our moods, right? And I think some good tips is just to keep it simple, but always have intention in your simplicity. And so when we look at these kind of more generic collages, mood boards, there's certain things that are here that I'm sure you all have in your mood boards. And so just looking at how intentional these mood boards are with those simple ingredients. So we see a photo in this mood board that doesn't really have anything to say about interior architecture, which seems to be the way that the mood board is leaning. But they can also represent just like a general feeling through this photo that doesn't represent interior architecture. And so I think it's totally okay to have those kind of random photos that may not have a direct correlation with what you're trying to communicate. You can be intentional with like the layout. As we look at other mood boards, you can see that some are gridded, some have overlapping, some are very irregular and kind of chaotic. And there's intention behind that. There's a reason for it to exist that way. There's texture and material in this mood board. There's font and color, all very like simple elements of a mood board, but also communicate so much. And also notice how they use that texture as a sample, but also as the background. So whatever the background is of your mood board is also an important communication device. And finally, they have their style, which you can see kind of repeated over and over again. And that's, I think, where these collages do a really great job, because to the average person, like when we talk about cubism in the landscape, we can use that word, but they may not understand what we're trying to really illustrate to them through our words. And that's where collage is really important. I know from interior design or architecture, I have no idea what kind of themes or genres these are coming from, but by seeing them all displayed here, I can start to get a feeling of what they're going for their work. So here are a couple other mood boards that I think are more of the direction that's easily approachable right now as designers. And these are all kind of communicating your intentions for some sort of future project or your interests. But this one, notice how the background's completely removed. So this gives me a real, like almost like a digital feel and a minimalist feel. We have a big emphasis on fonts here. We also have physical collages and mood boards. Some of the really engaging landscape architecture presentations I've seen, folks have created physical work and then put that into their digital presentations. So that could be in the form of, watercoloring your plant palette and then scanning that and putting it in, or making a physical mood board. that you leave at your desk, but you have an image like this to show. So again, all these elements, they do have some strings that are attaching themselves to each other, but they're all kind of fairly random, and that's okay. The utility mood board is for yourself, and then that conversation mood board um, is when you sometimes maybe you want to articulate with written word what connections you're trying to make, or what connections you feel. So this is sort of a pep talk for part 2 of the first assignment, which is hopefully you've um, assembled all these 15 images or elements in a utility mood board. And now it's time to look at some precedents for collages and try to put those images in a cohesive collage. And that will be due on Sunday by midnight.